What's going on, guys? This is nathINSANE, and I am bringing you the first Solar 3.0 build I have been using. I'm going to do my best to explain why I'm using what I'm using and the reasons, because the changes to the sandbox and how some of the abilities work is kind of important with this build, and for the reasoning as to why I use certain abilities over other. But I'm going to try to be also as concise and as quick as humanly possible, because ain't nobody got time for all that long-winded BS. Alright, let's go over the aspects, fragments, and abilities we're going to be using for this hunter build. Now, to start off with, I'm going to be using Gambler's Dodge. As much as I would love to use Acrobat's Dodge, it doesn't quite fit into this build yet, and once I find a build for Acrobat's Dodge, I will definitely post it on a future video, but for now, we're sticking with trusty Gambler's Dodge. Now, it's a pick your poison on what kind of jump you want to use and what kind of grenade you want to use, but I would recommend something that does DOT, damage over time, for a grenade. Now, this build is centered around throwing knives, and I use Knife Trick because I found it to be the most consistent of all the throwing knives. The closer you are to a target, the easier it is to hit Knife Trick because it throws out a nice spread of 3 knives, and I actually believe this causes Scorch to build up a lot faster than the other throwing knives. The other throwing knives, unfortunately, are just a little bit slow and cumbersome outside of lightweight knife, but that doesn't do as much damage, and this allows you to get Radiant a lot faster. Now, proximity knights are just not as smooth, unfortunately. They are decent, but they just don't quite do what I would like them to. There's just not an ease of use with them. Weighted knife, unfortunately, without Athras' Embrace, which is a bit tricky to get that damage boost to proc, just don't quite do what you need them to. They do decent chunk damage, but 18k overall, and they are very dependent on you hitting your headshots and such. Not the greatest, especially with all these enemies that have shields. So all these other throwing knives are very dependent on hitting the throwing knife, and when you're facing a bunch of enemies that have little tiny shields that can block, it can be a little obnoxious at times. I did find that the lightweight knife is pretty fun. It does have some pretty strong tracking on it, but overall does not have a crazy amount of damage. Versus just a triple throwing knife where you can just throw it at them and it will damage over time them if you are Radiant. And it does about 7k to the head, depending on what type of enemy it is. The yellow bars, the triple bar, yellow bar, health bar guys, they do about 4k, still pretty good damage overall, and a lot easier to hit all your shots and build up that Scorch damage and ignition, as you can see in this clip. Now, the solar aspect I'm going to be using, first off, is Knock 'em Dead. Your solar supers are enhanced. I'm using Blade Barrage, but you can use Marksman, Golden Gun, Deadshot, Golden Gun, whatever. Gives you increased damage resistance and duration. Duration for Golden Guns, basically, and Blade Barrage gets more projectiles, so that's pretty crispy, pun intended. And also, while Radiant, final blows with your throwing knife fully refund your melee energy. Second solar aspect I'm using is On Your Mark. Precision final blows grant you and nearby allies increase weapon handling, reload speed for a short duration, stacks 3 times, or if you use your class ability, immediately grants maximum stacks. Now, this build is going basically for team help and team boosting. You're kind of like the buffer of the team, and it also grants you 3 fragment slots versus Gunpowder Gamble, which only gives you 1. And the more fragment slots, this is way more of a team build versus just a solo DPS build. Now, the more fragments, the better. I was still messing around with fragments and seeing which ones I wanted to run, but I opted with Ember of Searing. Defeating Scorch enemies grants melee energy. Ember of Singeing, your class ability recharges faster when you scorch targets. This is why we're using throwing knives, because when you hit them with a throwing knife, it's going to scorch them. Ember of Eruption, your solar ignitions have increased area of effect, so when we're throwing all these throwing knives at bosses and building up ignition, when it does explode finally, it is a larger AoE. Ember of Blistering, defeating targets with solar ignitions grants grenade energy, so when they finally do blow up, you'll be getting your grenade energy back. Now, I will say this one can kind of get interchanged because ignition is kind of hard to proc since you're killing enemies so fast. It's not always super useful, so if you want to switch this one up, let me know if you find a different fragment that you'd rather use. And lastly, Ember of Torches. Powered melee attacks against combatants make you and nearby allies radiant. This makes a ton of sense. It goes with Ember of Searing, so when you're throwing knives people and you're killing with the throwing knives and such, then you are in facto getting radiant, so that makes things scorch. That's why you get DOT, damage over time, It's just a nice synergistic build. Now let's go over the equipment and mods we're going to be using on that equipment. For weapons, I'm going to let you guys choose and pick and choose what you want to use. Monte Carlo is probably the go-to for a safety net to make sure you're always getting that. And the exotic I use is the 6 Coyote, so that way I get double dodges and I am pretty much always guaranteed to have melees ready to go. For the helmet, I'm using Harmonic Siphon. Rapid Vital Blows with a damage type matching yours. Drops Orbs of Power. Also, I'm using Radiant Light, so that way casting your super you get charged with light, but it does give you that plus 20 crispy strength boost. And Hands On, gain super energy on melee kills. Since we're going to be getting a butt ton of melee kills with these throwing knives, this kind of just makes sense to get more super energy. And it gives you that plus 20 stat boost. So on the arms, I have it set for stasis, and with stasis you get melee kickstart and grenade kickstart. When your melee energy is fully expended, you gain melee energy, and the same for grenades with that mod. Now I'm not super sure on the cooldown effect of all of this, but it is probably the better of all the other perks to use. If not, let me know in the comments section if I am completely wrong here and I will switch it up. And we are doing elemental well build, so we're using elemental armaments, so that way when we're using our solar weapons, we're getting solar wells to spawn and we're picking them suckers up and then we're eating them and doing all the thing. Now for the exotic, this can change in the future, which if it does and I find something better, I will make a new video, but I'm using 6 Coyote, so that way I have a safety net of not just Monte Carlo, but 6 Coyote to make sure I always have melee energy. And I am stat focused on mobility, so that way I'm constantly getting my melee always recharging and recharging faster instead of being capped out at 1 dodge. I also have elemental ordnance on it, so that way when I do get grenade kills when I'm throwing them down, I get elemental wells from that. Now for the legs, I am using Font of Might, so that way we're getting the damage boost based on the weapons we are using, which match our solar subclass, obviously, since we are in Solar 3.0, dude. I am also using Invigoration, reduce melee cooldown each time you pick an Orb of Power up. So that goes in with Harmonic Siphon, because I will be creating a ton of Orbeez, and there will be Orbeez everywhere because I'm going to always have abilities going and such. It's kind of a nice synergistic build right there. I use double of that. And then with our class item, I am using Utility Kickstart. When you use your class ability and it's fully expended, you gain class ability. I'm using double of that with Melee Well Maker, since we are going to be using a ton of throwing knives and making a ton of wells. That's going to do it for me, guys. Hopefully this is helpful and you use this build and you enjoy it. If not, let me know if you guys have a better build, and I will definitely love to try that out, because this is what we're doing. We're making cool builds. This is what 3.0 is supposed to be all about. I will say that Solar 3.0 doesn't have as much craziness as Void 3.0 did, because it doesn't have volatile rounds and such, but I do think there is a ton of potential for builds on Solar 3.0. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section. How do you feel about Solar 3.0? What do you like? What do you dislike? What builds are you using? And I will catch you guys in the next one. So long and good night.